And with that, we get to our main topics today here on Mastering Dungeons. Yes, right, topics with an S, because as of last week, what we decided to do was cover two main topics in each episode. The first being a mini review of the 2024 rules. So what we are going to do, rather than covering it in depth in several episodes, is just pick and choose little pieces of the new rules that we will give a quick but hearty look at. And then after that, we will get back to our other main topic, which is going through the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer guide. So what's our mini review of the 2024 rules this week?
Oh, let me try to find it.
Search and ye shall find.
Oh.
Or should I say, use the search action
Yeah.
and you will gain the found condition.
Ooh.
Yeah. So we will look at searching and learning things and how to do that with the different editions. So the first question is, what is the design goal, or what is the design parameters around the thing we're about to talk about? And what we're asking is, or what the game is trying to tell us, is how do you handle when characters need to find something that are hidden or learn information that they may or may not know, especially if they're right in the middle of an intense situation like a combat. And I've been waiting to use this term on the Eldritch Lorecast, but they keep putting off the question. So I'm going to bring it right now. How do you avoid the ludonarrative dissonance? Ludonarrative dissonance of having to spend a valuable game resource, which are your actions, that are so useful in combat to do things that aren't going to take away hit points from the monster or make the monster easier to hit or heal your allies, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So what does that mean exactly? What that means is, in the story of the game that you're playing, you may run into the room and the dragon swoops down to breathe on you, but you also realize that there are other things happening that you aren't aware of. And so in the story of the game, what would you do? You would say, I look around. I try to find the lever that I know will release the prisoners. I want to find the hidden sigil.
Sword of dragon slaying.
The sword of dragon slaying that is got to be somewhere in this room because we were told it was. So the story wants you to do that, but the game penalizes you for trying to do that because everything needs to be broken down into an action.
Yeah.
And if you're spending an action to do that, you are not spending an action to take care of the main threat, which is the dragon.
May I give an example of this?
Please do.
4th edition had as sort of its baked in thing that a monster required on average 4 hits to take down. It extended this to its trap design. So most traps required 4 checks to disable. So what they thought would happen is that they would put a trap in a room and the rogue would go deal with that for 4 rounds, just like attacking, and it should be easy cash, no money changes hands, everybody's feeling good. What actually happened is people would conclude, ignore that trap because we can all work together to kill this monster. It's not same as cash. It's way better to fight the monster, unless the trap was so horrendous in its damage that it was better than a monster, right? And so traps got ignored, and it just became the norm until designers started making up for it with their own sort of side stuff, because you just couldn't go that way, right? Because and part of it is the philosophy, the mental, for a player, succeeding or failing at a skill check feels different. It really feels like you wasted your action when you failed at it versus missing the monster. It was a psychologically even worse, even though game designers would have said, but it's the same. Well, no.
And that's the thing, right? On the game side, it can be the same, but in the minds of the players, whether it's the storytelling or ignoring the storytelling, because the game itself asks for these things. And I would go so far as to say that it was worse for a player to succeed on a check than it was for them to fail on the thing, at least how they felt, because killing the monster is the thing in most D&D, and to be told otherwise is dissonant.
Yeah. The other thing is that when you're doing things that involve checks, you fall closer into DM purview, right? It's pretty black and white attacking a monster and dealing damage to it. It's unlikely your DM is going to mess with that or surprise you or make some ruling you won't like. But making a check on whether something is useful or not, I've played many, many games where I tried to be the cool creative person and the DM at this convention goes, yeah, no, that doesn't do anything. And you're like, really? It seems so fun that I could topple this onto the monster. And yeah, you toppled it, it doesn't do anything to the monster. Okay. Next person's turn, and you feel punished for it. So that ambiguity, that uncertainty, that risk element makes it even worse for these kinds of actions.
Right. And so what do some games try to do? They try to add a resource that can be used outside of your main action to do these things. And it can work. We played the MCDM game, and they have maneuvers.
Yeah.
And that's all well and good. But if you do that, then what you have to do is every combat has to have something for the players to use that resource for. Otherwise, what the players will do with that resource is what we see with bonus actions, which is I just use my bonus action, min-maxing to the best use of it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to waste my bonus action, even though that might be what a bonus action would have been made for.
Yeah.
So adding resources doesn't help unless the game itself supports it. So
and that's maybe worth saying too, is that a lot of people running 2014 had sort of defaulted to like, well, I'll let you make, because I don't want to use up that action economy, I'll let you just make a check, or I'll let you do it as a bonus action. Bonus action's a problem because it fights certain classes, right? It's unequal. Some classes need their bonus action to be as effective as other classes. But you'd might see free action, right? Like, yeah, just make me a type of search check, because you make me an investigation check to see whether you see it, or a perception check, and then I'll tell you some stuff, but I'm going to let you have your full round. And so when you go and codify something, you're now saying to those DMs, yeah, don't do that. Don't do that thing you were doing, because now it really should cost. It really should cost.
Right. And we'll talk about something that is now in the game that tells you as the DM for 2024, you really don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So what did 2014 do? Well, 2014 had a search action. When you take that action, you devote your attention to finding something. I'm quoting the rules here. Depending on the nature of your search, the DM might have you make a wisdom perception check or an intelligence investigation check. So what do you see? You see, you might maybe have looked for something. Now, noticing illusions, such as the major image spell, has a specific thing that says the creature that uses its action to examine the image of the major image spell can determine that it is an illusion. I'm like, okay, with a successful intelligence investigation check against your spell save DC. So it's making you use an action to interact, not even to interact with, but to notice something wrong with the illusion without having to interact with it.
Yeah.
By just examining.
Yeah, and it's important to say that this does tie into the other rules, like things like traps, right? Other things that are trying to hide or conceal themselves, or that are there to be found. And so, this is saying that, okay, if you have a trap that's concealed, it's going to be either wisdom perception or intelligence investigation. You got to go to the trap rules to figure that out. There might be some ambiguity there. In fact, there's a lot of ambiguity in the 2014 rules to resolve that and what it truly means. And did you find that there is a trap? Did you find that there is a trap and how to disable it? Right? Those are all questions that can come based on what the rest of the rules adjudicate.
Right. And so there is some touch points with the rules in 2014, but it's still a little bit vague.
Mm-hmm.
So what
Which
does
could
the
be a
2020?
strength.
Yes. So what does the 2024 Player's Handbook tell us? Well, we now have actions more codified, such as the search action, where you make a wisdom and then it says insight, medicine, perception, or survival check. When you take the search action, you make this wisdom check to discern something that isn't obvious. The search table below suggests which skills are applicable when you take this action, depending on what you're trying to detect. And they have a nice little thing where it says insight, you're detecting a creature's state of mind. Medicine, a creature's ailment or cause of death, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in addition to the search action, there's also the study action. So when you take the study action, you make an intelligence check to study your memory, a book, a clue, or another source of knowledge to call to mind an important piece of information. And then they have their own table that tells which skills you would use to search certain things, including monster types. So if you're trying to take the study action to know about undead, that would be intelligence religion. If you are trying to, like, elementals would be, and it gives you a list of all those things. So this study check is the intelligence version of the search action. So we get those two right up front. So how does that then interact with the rest of the rules? Well, we have two feats, one called observant and one called keen mind. When you take the search action, you can take it as a bonus action if you have the observant feat. So now what we're saying is you can't just, for any character, say do this as a bonus action or do this as a free action. Well, you can as the game master, but the rules tell you that that is not what is expected.
Well, and
because anyone taking these feats will expect to have this as a bonus action because they have sacrificed some other thing that they could have had to have this important ability.
So if you give the other player at the table who didn't take this feat this benefit often enough, well, they're fools for having chosen the feat that they thought they were so clever to choose, right? And that really forces the hand of DMs, because now you've got to choose, you know, what do you do? Do you say to everybody in your home campaign, hey, don't take that feat because I'm going to let you do this often? And I've had that kind of situation, right? Where I've said with things like observant, hey, look, I don't let you use your passive a lot. I tend to use active checks. So it's not that it'll never be important, but it's not going to be as important as it may be at other tables. Up to you what you want to do. And then, you know, literally saw the player go like, yep, crossing that feat off my list, getting a, you know, that becomes because of this sort of forced, right? That it forces the DM's hand in that way.
And if this feat is there and they are supposedly in some way equal to each other, what that says is the game expects the study action and the search action. The keen mind feat is the one that gives you study as a bonus action. It expects that to be important enough that it would be good to take, which means in encounters that you create, you want to give some reason to make the study action or the search action and make it valuable, which goes to the question that we had at the beginning of this segment, which is, how do you use those in a game to make the characters and the players feel like they're doing something important when they're not hitting the dragon with their sword, but instead they are looking at the pile of treasure to find the sword of dragon slaying.
Let me ask you a question, Shawn. We have a search, like when I first looked at this, and in fact, I started this segment forgetting this. When I first looked at it, I thought, oh, search, that's what I would use to find a trap, when it's actually study. What's the point of having these two split up? Like, why? Is just trying to make it easier to read? Like, why did they choose to use study for arcana, history, investigation, nature, and religion, and then search for insight, medicine, perception, survival. It's just an action. Is it so that you can have more feats to trigger off of this? Like,
I think my answer is one of the first things I looked at when I opened the 2024 book was, did they finally just get rid of intelligence investigation and or combine it with perception, wisdom perception, and just make one like observant, and just because that's the thing. There are these two things that do the same thing. I know that there are very specific instances where you're Sherlock Holmesing something, and so you want that investigation because you're not just finding the clue, but you're interpreting it.
Yeah.
But by interpreting it, you're taking away some of the agency of the player that has fun by saying, oh, look, I found these ashes. Who do we remember that was smoking a pipe that had this dark green tobacco? Oh, right. It was back at the tavern when we were talking with, this NPC. And it sort of takes away that agency. So I think they're doing it because they want to further exemplify those two things. When for me, it doesn't do anything other than muddle it even more.
Yeah, it'd be different if D&D had like, one of these procedural approaches to like traversing the wilderness and dungeons and things like that, where you would be kind of like on your turn stating, I'm taking the study, action as we move through the dungeon, and someone else is taking search and so on. But D&D doesn't sort of have that. It's really interesting. And that the whole identifying the type of a monster, boy, is that important enough to know, hey, this is a monstrosity versus an aberration, that you want to spend a whole action on it? I mean, it's interesting to me that the designers feel that way.
And then it goes back to, okay, do I want to know what resistances this monster has? I want to know what vulnerabilities this monster has.
Well, in theory, that is not part of this.
Right.
Nothing here says that, but yeah.
But that's that when we watched Deborah Ann teaching John how to play, right? What was his first question? What do I know about this monster? It is a totally reasonable and even typical question from new players, from veteran players, from everyone. What do I know? What do I know? What can I learn to get an advantage on this? And so it's so much part of the psyche of players, but it never really gets addressed in a way that is, I don't know, fun. It's never integrated into the game seamlessly. And when it is, it's just hard to do. It's hard to do well.
Well, to me, this makes it less fun, right? In that, and I'm not trying to be negative about this, it's just from a design perspective, to me, when you force spending actions, now you've assigned a cost to that, right? You've assigned a friction gradient to that action being spent this way because you could attack and kill a thing, right? So if this fight with an owlbear is going to be a tough fight, me trying to figure out what I know about owlbears is around, I could be hurting it if it is going to be a combat scenario. And I might just be smarter to say, probably a combat scenario, I'm just going to attack it, when that might be the opposite of what the DM wants, right? You're messing it up. What to me, the fun is exactly what we saw in that video. You ask the question and the DM decides how much information to give you based on the type of scenario it is and kind of experience that you're creating. You're doing that together, right? And that's the fun of it, because what I actually want at my tables is more asking of questions, more interaction, less of this perceived friction around these kinds of things, right? I want you asking if anything looks weird in the tiles as you move across them to go fight the goblin, not thinking that you should spend an action on that, right? Like that's like a wham moment, right? Like, oh, you spend an action instead of attacking the goblin. There's nothing there. Now the goblin crits you, like that's no fun. Like,
so I'm going to take it one step further, Teos, right? Ready? You're DMing. Okay. You're DMing. I'm a player. I'm going through the woods and there are hellhounds coming toward me. I cast Spike Growth. Okay. The transformation of the ground is camouflaged to look natural. Any creature that can't see the area when the spell is cast must take a search action and succeed on a wisdom, perception, or survival check against your spell save DC to recognize the terrain as hazardous before entering it. So I see the Hellhounds coming. They can't see the ground right now. So I cast that knowing that they're going to run through it. So you're the game master. What do you do?
Well, they're hellhounds, so they're just going to run through. But it's an interesting question of whether you could eat up one of their actions by having them all search the area. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and yes, it would change if it was right. Wizards,
bandits or whatever. Yeah, right.
Bandits, something that was intelligent or more intelligent.
Yeah,
or
they
less
heard you casting,
even.
so they might all, one of them takes a search action and fails. The next one takes a search action, succeeds, shouts a warning, and they all circumvent your spell and go around it. Was that fun? Was that?
Yeah, and so that puts the DM always has the freedom to do whatever they want.
No, but it changes the game, right? It creates different sets of incentives. That's why design matters, because it creates different sets of baselines for play. And now you're hard coding this type of thing. Whereas the language in 2014, and what's funny about this is just a great example of looking at design. I love that you picked search because it was already an action, but the way it was written was loose enough that it was really encouraging the DM to make calls. And so when you present that, the bandits running around, you had a lot of freedom as to how you might do that, even though search is an action and so on. But now that there are these feats with the bonus action declaration, and this is all super codified and broken out with examples, now you're really being told, hey, you as a DM need to make that call of what these creatures do to spend an action. And it becomes a different type of play. And possibly a very tactical game kind of emerging out of this if enough people go down that line of saying, well, it feels almost like a computer, right? I'm going to spend my action on this. Did I see it? No. Yeah. And number two, no, we will start moving around the edge of the spell.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I'm stuck on the spike growth thing. So now I'm the game master and I cast spike growth. The players don't see it, so the first player runs through it, taking damage as they go.
Yeah.
Do the other players now know where it is? Do they have to take the search action to find the area? Can they tell the other players where that area is? It's these questions were always there. But it just shows the complexity of the game and how hard it is to quantify, qualify, and gamify things that narratively make sense, but rules-wise are very difficult to pin down.
Well, and here's a great example of this. How when you start codifying things, now achieving balance and uniformity becomes harder and harder, right? So spike growth, as you point out, takes a search action to recognize the terrain as hazardous. But the rules for identifying an ongoing spell are that you have to take the study action to make a DC 15 intelligence arcana check versus the spike growth is the search action and the DC based on the spell save DC. So it's like we have two competing ways that the creatures could identify this spell once they know there's a spell in the area. Right? And, we could say both are possible. Each creature, the hellhounds get to choose, when the first one hits one. Oh boy,
Oh, and now I need to look up because there's wording about instantaneous spells versus ongoing spells. And I'm wondering if spike growth is instantaneous but creates a terrain, or if it is because that wording is now super important.
It is concentration.
Okay, it is concentration, so it is an ongoing spell. Okay.
So
There you
you
go.
could really use both
Either. Yep.
rules apparently apply, either against the save DC with a wisdom perception of survival using the search action, or as an ongoing spell that has observable effects. Then you could take the study action and a DC 15 intelligence arcana check. So good luck deciding which one a particular creature or even PC should use. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so that was just like one tiny bit of the new 2024 rules
Yeah.
that we spent probably too long on. But we are game designers, so we do want to uh, cover these
And
things.
none of that's to say this is very important. It may sound like we're just
Yeah,
being like folks have often reacted to in the past. We're not just complaining for complaining's sake. We're trying to analyze the design. We would both have a
right.
lot of fun playing this scenario with the Hellhounds and whatever. Even though our design brain might be logging all this, we could have a perfectly awesome time role playing our way through this encounter.
Oh, yeah.
And we would not, hurt the people at our table emotionally
No.
with our discussion of this.
Well, any more than usual.
Any
But
more
yeah.
than usual, yes.
No, I think that's a great point, because we wouldn't sit and analyze this. We would just play and have fun and laugh. Cool. All right. So getting into our other main topic today, the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer. We are currently going through the regions and talking about the high level, not high level as in power, but the high level as in information about each region and sort of what they are and what they bring to the setting.
Mm-hmm.
We left off with Highfolk.
Yeah.
So let's dive into Highfolk. Highfolk is a town and the surrounding frontier territory that's north of Valuna, and it's dominated mostly by elves from the nearby Vesva forest. The Yatil Mountains and the Velvadiva River make up its pretty unique geography. So there's a lot geographically happening there.
Yeah, it's really cool. And so this is kind of not far from the center of the map of Greyhawk. It's sort of west of the near div big giant lake. It's south of the Empire of Ayuz, and so let's say southwest, south of the Vesve Forest. And it is it's an area that has allies and then one big giant threat. And as you said, a big part of it is the fact that it includes this Vez forest, and the Vesve forest has active elves. And so the way the write-up takes place, it's like a dual look at elven / humans and humanish peoples, and how kind of like it credits two rulers, right? Because it looks at this as sort of a combination of two peoples, which is really kind of neat.
Yeah, it is. But it also just reminds me of that thing that we talked about, I think, with Alyssa, which is if the whole thing is just there's the humans and then the elves, and they're not really warring, but they just sort of ignore each other. But, oh, here's a big threat, and we need to go talk to the elves or go talk to the humans to get them to help the elves, et cetera, et cetera. That trope has sort of been done and then done again and then done again. So I would want something. I would want to add something a little different there. I would want to wipe out the humans settlement, and now it's just the elves fighting against help with the survivors of whatever took over Highfolk, trying to liberate it.
Well, and I think that's showing the bias of the original designers in that no group of gnomes or elves or whatever other than Selene gets their true we are a region, right? They get treated as ands. The difference here being at least you are true and it's this group and that group. You get the 50-50 and whereas otherwise you're footnotes, and no matter how important you are within a particular region. I do at least, I mean, I don't feel quite as strong as you do. I actually like that of the many regions in Greyhawk, this one really is sort of all about this sort of shared pieces. It presents Highfolk as a very idyllic farmland kind of place with a strong communal bond between all the peoples. And that has extended into the history of how they've worked with the elves to have more bonds than usual, more than in other regions, so that they have a reason, even if they still see each other as separate groups, they have these strong reasons to work together, in particular some of the towns that are in the Vesva Forest. um, and what I think is a little weird is it's sort of like there's this dissonance between all these descriptions of how everything's great and then the, oh, by the way, Ayuz is causing all these problems, and this is all causing all this tension, and you know, it's a little bit of that history versus the now that this book sometimes suffers for. And I think this is a place where it really suffers from it, because it tells you a lot of like how it used to be as if that's the way it is now, and then it hits you with the, these tensions are pretty enormous.
Yeah, I was going to say it about a later section, so you beat me to the punch on that. Well, I do know that Highfolk in the Living Greyhawk campaign was Wisconsin, and you know, the seat, if you will, of Dungeons and Dragons, since that's where Lake Geneva, where Gygax lived, and I know that many people love that region. Normally for giving out overpowered magic items, but also, you know, for the good stories that were there. And
that too.
Jason Bullman was a triad member there, went on to obviously work at Paizo. Chris Tulak was a triad member there, went on to work at Wizards. I'm sure I'm forgetting. I think Greg Marks was a triad member there, went on to do all sorts of freelance stuff. So, you know, it was a very noted region for their stories and the people that worked on them.
Yeah, I heard tales of their interactives tying into one of our listener questions for that strong sense of what you're doing matters, right? So yeah,
right. So leaving Highfolk, we head north to the Ice Barbarians. So of all the inhospitable lands of the frozen north, this one is the least hospitable. They do have a king, but he has very little control over the jarls that are sort of make up the fiefs that he oversees. So everyone's fiercely independent, hard to get everyone rowing in the same direction unless you're on your longboat heading toward a raid. And they really don't like the Scarlet Brotherhood. So this is another region like the Frost Barbarians, where the Sul who split off went north away from the Sul leadership. And so they still hold a strong grudge against the Sul that led them away from their homeland. And so they really don't like the Scarlet Brotherhood, and they hate the fact that the Frost Barbarians are falling more and more under the sway of the Scarlet Brotherhood.
Yeah, and you mentioned this last time when we talked about the Frost Barbarians, how you almost have to read all of the, well, not almost, you really have to read all of the Barbarian sections, because each section tells you more info about the others that wasn't there. Yeah, they didn't figure out how to separate it. And so, you know, here is where it gives you this picture of the group that said no to the Sul Brotherhood. And they say to the Scarlet Brotherhood, you know, this king says, yeah, no, that we're not going with this. You guys are full of it. And they murder the king. The Scarlet Brotherhood murders the king. So then the one that is now the current leader is the one who, when they next showed up, actually cut up the delegation from the Scarlet Brotherhood as his answer of, yeah, no, I'm not going to be intimidated. So they have essentially declared war. And they know that the Frost Barbarians are working with them. And so there's now like more enmity than normal for the Frost Barbarians. But it's, again, you know, it's hard to, there's a lot of interesting things you can work with if this appeals to you, which is interesting. It's not always written up in the most useful way, but there's a lot, I think, going on here that to me was interesting.
Next, we get to Irongate. Irongate is a free city in the south portion of the Flanace. They have a Lord High Mayor named Cobb Darg, who is elected by a city council. It is on the eastern coast of the Azure Sea, just east of Anwal and just west of Alyssa. And it's sort of sitting on an isthmus and controls traffic, especially trade that passes through them heading toward the coast.
Yeah.
Now, this was the region, Teos, where I was reading it, and I was like, okay, it's a very small, it's just a city. It doesn't have all these regions and different things going on. And I'm like, okay, I'm 3 pages in and I'm still on the history section. What? And none of it was like, oh, okay, I can make a great adventure based on this. It was all like, and this council
Yeah.
overthrew this person, and then this trade negotiations fell through, and then they warring with each other, but then this other faction came in, and then they were all warring against them. And I'm like, okay, it's great. It's I won't say it's interesting, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Tell
Yeah.
me why I want to adventure in and around Irongate. I need
Yeah.
to know.
And Irongate was not a region. I had to check and confirm that, but Onwall was. And
Mhm.
so, if you kind of if you think of Greyhawk as sort of looking like a croissant, a little bit like curling around with water, sort of where the bread isn't. Um, on the kind of bottom of one of the sides, that's where Irongate joins to Onwall and becomes a
Mhm.
sort of bottleneck that you'd have to get through to attack Onwall. And so, because the Scarlet Brotherhood are heavily involved in Onwall, this becomes an important piece in denying the Scarlet Brotherhood movement back and forth. And the fact that Irongate sort of cleverly was able to figure out alliances and oppose things and react to atrocities in smart ways is what's held the Scarlet Brotherhood at bay. And it's really only if you take those parts and sort of rewrite those conflicts and intrigues as the now that I think it becomes a better adventuring place,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's a lot of, I said this before, and it's, as I continue to read through, it becomes more and more clear that th- this is a great book. This isn't necessarily a great book for somebody who just wants to put a few adventures or a campaign in a certain place.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is a great book for people who are running a huge campaign to dig into for stories that they need to explain out to other DMs
Yeah. Yep.
and players.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is the kind of region that has tons of potential lessons that if you wanted to in the Dungeon Master's Guide teach lessons, you could do that with any number of these regions and teach some really useful regions or lessons as to what makes for a great area of the world to start with and move into and expand upon and how. Any number of these offer some really interesting ideas.
Yeah. After Irongate, we get to the Empire of Iuz. And this is where I was like, okay, here we go. And the government section, normally I'm like, okay, government, yeah, it's a feudal monarchy with a king elected by a council. Wait, what? Okay, what's this? Imperial theocratic dictatorship. Empire directly but inconsistently ruled, excuse me, by an evil demigod and managed by his priesthood and other spellcasters.
Yeah, that's a no joke there. And similarly, I love the enemies section, which says in alphabetical order, and then kind of lists the world, right? Like just, I mean, because allies are none. So I just think it's so funny that they're like, let's just list everything, group after group after group. And they even end with, in short, most sane beings of Oerth count Iuz as their mortal enemy, all fear and hate him. It just shows how that they were willing to spend words on all of this, the entire list, and the last bit. Oh my goodness.
Right. And what I like about this region, again, this is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
This is where you need heroes to go in and do some damage. And so the regions within this area include the Land of Iuz, the Bandit Lands, the Barren Lands, the Horn Lands, the Shield Lands, and they each have capitals, but the capitals sort of are but aren't. You can have more than like one capital because
Yeah.
Iuz is like, okay, now that's the capital. And everyone's like, okay, I guess that's the capital now. But you can see a campaign where the characters must systematically, starting with the outer areas or the areas closest to the good lands, go in and take down this one leader,
Yeah. Yeah.
solidify power.
And it can be super epic. And in fact, one of the things that was interesting about living Greyhawk, as Shawn recovers from coughing, is that the various regions, Ayu's wasn't a playable region, but impacted several playable regions, and those regions could play with it. So one of like the coolest adventures out there was in the Bandit Kingdoms, this adventure called Doraka, which is the name of the capital of Ayu's, where you got to go and infiltrate it. And you couldn't go and like take down Ayu's, but you could actually take down a lesser Boneheart and do kind of various things in that. And it was like the kind of thing that when you played it, you couldn't be more scared for the life of your character, right? It was like big deal, cast all your things, and it had some very serious moments. Like I remember one where we were trying to think, should we do X or should we do Y? And the cleric thought, well, I'll cast, I forget what it was, but one of the cleric spells that gives you a portent, right? And then one of the players goes, wait a minute, doesn't the closest god answer the question? And we'll go, oh yeah, that would have been Ayu's, alerting them to the fact that we're here in his kingdom. And in fact, there is a list of spells that if the players cast, they have serious consequences. And this was one of them where it would have caused all kinds of trouble had we cast that spell, right? And that's the kind of fun, epic, thing you can have with these kinds of situations, right? So having this kind of thing in a setting is a ton of fun that, Forgotten Realms doesn't quite have them. I mean, yes, it has Zastam and Thay, but it's a different feel than an actual demon,
Right.
Cambion living in your lands and taking over all the lands around it.
Yeah, it's totally true. And that's why a lot of the adventure modules that came out for Greyhawk later in its lifespan dealt exactly with Ayu's the Old and really highlighted and fleshed out the adventures taking place in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and I would say that while I like the information in that chapter in various ways, making it actionable towards other regions would have been more helpful, right? And if it'll be interesting to see if the DMG touches on Ayu's and how it uses it in 2024, because it is one of the giant agents of adventure and high level danger, but even low level danger, right? To so much of the area around it. In fact, the agents acting anywhere across the land because it's an actual war going on. But yeah, so it'll be fascinating to see what they do.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. This is going to be, I hope, where a lot of that book focuses.
Yeah, it'd be epic.
And the next region is one that brought back memories / post-traumatic stress flashbacks. Is Keoland.
Yeah.
Keoland is where I was a triad member for a couple of years. And this land was a beast. It is a monarchy with several baronies or smaller regions ruled by barons, viscounts, earls, etc. And each region, each sub-region of Keoland sort of had a little bit different flavor. And so this is where I think the strength of the book was, because it allowed us as the creators of the campaigns for other DMs to run, could take the history and really not ignore it, but find ways to make an interesting step forward for adventures. But even then it was hard.
Yeah.
And one of the rough patches of Keoland was it was so big and there were so many stories that you could tell. And there was so much great stuff happening in other regions that was like immediate and forceful that this old monarchy, this old creaky monarchy that's trudging forward and it's very bureaucratic. And there's so many different power groups, the Silent Ones and the Dreadwalkers and the Dark Watch and Knights of this and Knights of that, that it was hard to get everything moving in the same direction.
Yeah.
One of the mandates when I took over was and it wasn't even a mandate from above, it was a mandate from the players,
Yeah.
which is give us stories that we care about
Yeah.
right now. And so I picked a couple of different storylines, and I was just like, okay, we're going to have 4 adventures in a row, and they're all just going to cover this. And then we'll deal with this thread. But as we deal with that thread, Wheels Within Wheels will give clues to the next place we're about to
Mm-hmm.
go. And that was where this book helped me get that sort of mindset where I could understand what players wanted, what game masters wanted, and start creating adventures that did dual service of be fun now, but tell a larger story that will be fulfilled later.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, I was not a triad member. I was a player, and so for me, it was just looking up at folks like you that did this work and having incredible respect for it because you could see how difficult it was with any region, but especially some of these regions that were more stable to figure out how to make that exciting and interesting. And it's really easy to oh well, nobody should mess with the Dreadwalkers. Okay, if we go into the Dread Forest and we fight those people, those are dangerous. Well, that doesn't give you a lot to act with, right? So what's my storyline that I as an adventurer care about? Because it's fine to say like there are no undead in Keelan and that's funny, but what do you do with that? And it can be really difficult. And your region, I think Keelan really found it and hit a stride on it. But there were other regions that I would visit or even live in that did not find their way into telling that story really across 5 or 7 years did not find their way to tell a story because it was hard to figure that out. And there's some knowledge in that too that I wonder whether the 2024 rule book will hit upon of, you can have these areas that, well, what do you do in the stable location and do you want to be there, right? Maybe you do, and because it's just your character's story, but it's yeah. If what you want out of Greyhawk is these kinds of nations in motion, all of these perilous plots that are unfolding, well, stability is hard to work with in that context.
Yeah. And what a blessing but a curse for Keeland was there was so much baggage from previous adventures, published adventures. Saltmarsh
Yeah.
is in Keoland. The Lizard King modules in Keoland. Vecna was said to have, lived in the western section of Keoland. So, people are like, oh, I can't wait for the Saltmarsh adventure. I can't. And we're like, we can't do all of
what are you
those
going to do with it's already done, right? And so how do you touch on it? And if you just touch on it, well, that's cute, but that wasn't exciting. Right. Yeah, that's I think the Duchy of Ernst had a lot of trouble with that too, with being that close to like Greyhawk and places like because you could touch on things, but you couldn't go into Mar Castle because that's a published adventure that's done. But players kind of wanted those. Yeah, it actually is harder for having that.
And what I found most pleasing to most players was not what was in the book, but was creating something that they could create with me. So I created a sub-barony right on the Rushmore, the marsh, the swampland, where Vecna was supposedly situated. And create new NPCs there, create new stories there, create new situations there that tied back to the history but didn't rely on the history, so that people could get in on the ground floor of this new region. And I was touched when I saw on Anna Meyer's map that little barony that I created is there with the
awesome.
towns that I named and that other people helped me name. And it was fun
that's
to
really
see
neat.
that.
That's great. Yeah, and that's a good point, right? That sometimes even though there is all this setting, the answer is to create your own little part of it and flesh that out so that it is all around the characters and your stories that you do together rather than feeding off of these other ideas someone else came up with. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Huh. Now the themes of Keoland are I already touched on that sort of this old bureaucratic thing, government, with a newish and less politically savvy king. So there were a whole line of kings that were sort of the old guard. And then finally they died out, and the council didn't know what to do. So they made the king this sort of adventurer ranger who patrolled the Dreadwood. He was a noble, sort of, but he got his hands dirty. And now he's the king. So part of it, it's sort of like a Game of Thrones sort of thing,
Yeah.
where you make this nobody king because you have an easier chance to control them and get them to do what you want. And so that was a fun aspect to play with. But then there's a swamp here, there's a dreadful forest here, literally called the Dreadwood. Your navy out of the city of Gradsel that's the New York City of Greyhawk. If Greyhawk is like LA, Gradsel's New York City. So it's it's gritty and it's mercantile, and it's there's a lot of fun things you can play with. You just don't want to try to do too much with it.
Yeah, it was a neat region. I enjoyed a lot of play there, and it was fun one of the things that Keelan had going for was, because all of these old histories tied into so many regions, it was a great place to link to for other regions. So the kind of meta regionals and the cross regional conventions and things like that were a lot of fun to see through, and because it was like everybody's parent, right? Keelan was everybody's dad in some way, and
right, everyone was breaking. Everyone broke away, but you also need some help. Maybe,
Dad, could I have some troops to fight back these undead? I don't know. You murdered my guy I sent 100 years ago, and you have sword wraiths between us. Yeah, but I really kind of need to fight this evil thing.
Yep. So there was some fun along those lines as well. Well, Cat is a huge region that I think we will need to dive into a little deeper than the time we have. So we will hit that next time. Teos, I'm going to let you close up here so I don't cough myself into a coma.
Absolutely. Well, Shawn, do you want to share anything you've been up to?
No.
All right. Well, I will share that one thing I did was, we spoke before about conventions. We talked about PAX West. Well, on the Gamehole side, registrations are starting. The VIGs began registrations last week, and then general registration is coming. So I put together a post on my blog where you can see everything I'm involved in, and including things that Shawn are involved in, is involved in, and things that our Discord members are involved in. So you can find actually a lot of cool options for your Gamehole Con if you choose to go to Gamehole Con. So check that out. There are links from there to all the events at alphastream.org. You can look at that blog post and see all the things that we're involved in, the Mastering Dungeons live recording, and many other things like that. And that's all thanks to our patrons, that we have these awesome relationships on our Discord. So thank you, patrons, for keeping the lights on, for inspiring us with all these cool ideas. Thank you to our Master of Dungeons supporters. Special shout out to our Master of Realms. You are all listed in our show notes. And our Masters of the Multiverse. Thank you so much. Keith Aman of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Lou Anders, we mentioned the cool release for the Kobold Press. Lazy Wolf Studios at lazywolfstudios.com. Craig Bailey, David Bastianson, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Calvin Bridges Avalos, Evil John Carney, Will Doyle, Andy Edmonds at Nerdonomicon, James Fisher, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios. Welcome, Scott. Ben Heisler and Paige Laitman, Sean Hurst, The Mighty Jerd, Brian King, Jim Klinger, aka DM Prime Mover, Chad Lynch, Paul Matta, The Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, who we talked about the region of Jeff last time, Trey McLemore, John Mickey, Sean Molly, Falcon Neal, Tom Nelson of the Deck of Player Safety, Mighty Zeus, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Robert Pazley, Vladimir Prenner from Croatia, Pugnus, Ozymandias Rex, Chance Russo at Dragarusso, Andy Shockney, Krishna Simons, Josh and Lewanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Jeremy Taloman from the D&D and TV podcast, Tres, Joe Tyler, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, James Walton, Graham Ward, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Javier Wasiak, Chris Webster, Walt Winfrey, and we had mentioned before Anna Meyer as well. Thank you so much for all of you supporting us at the Master of the Multiverse level. It really is incredible, fuels everything we do. You can join us at patreon.com/masteringdnd. And you can find Shawn at Shawn Merwin on Twitter and all the other places, at Mastering D&D on Twitter and Mastodon and Blue Sky and everywhere. We have our YouTube. Come see us, give it the thumbs up, sign up for notifications. And Shawn, what are we going to do now?
Eat a cough drop.
Yes, but is it a Valunan cough drop? Is it a Frost Barbarian? Actually, it's probably a Frost Barbarian cough drop, I'm thinking.
I'd take it.